Hello and welcome everyone. I am Adeshawa Josh and this is Africa Matters. This week we take a look at the spate of coups in African countries, including the most recent failed attempt to overthrow a democratic government in Guinea-Bissau. Nigerian authorities are trying to crack down on online lenders who use dirty tactics to ensure their debts get paid. And South Africa is coping with the deadly effects of the climate crisis, with flash floods and heavy rains destroying many homes. An attack on democracy. That's how Guinea-Bissau's President Umaro Sissoco Embalo described the failed attempt to overthrow his government on Tuesday. Local media reports say at least 6 people were killed in a gun battle with security forces as the attackers tried to break into the presidential palace during a cabinet meeting. It's unclear who's behind the attempted coup, but witnesses say the gunmen carried AK-47s and some appeared to be wearing military uniforms. The foiled coup is the latest in a series of attacks on democratically elected governments in West Africa. It's a trend that's been repeatedly condemned by regional body Takeovers and drawn concern from the UN. Citizens in Guinea-Bissau also voiced unease about what this turmoil means for the future of their country.
That was not the purpose of the fight for liberation. We fought so that the country could move forward. Why is it that other countries are evolving and we are still fighting? Why? What good will it do?
Nobody will accept to invest in a country where there is no peace. Not to mention the other consequences, I'm afraid that our studies will be interrupted, which will make us lose a lot of time. It is very complicated.
Guinea-Bissau is no stranger to military coups. The country has witnessed 4 coups and more than a dozen attempts since gaining independence from Portugal almost 50 years ago. The current crisis began when President Embalo declared himself winner of the 2019 presidential election runoff without waiting for his opponent's petition for a vote recount at the Supreme Court. That reportedly created factions for and against the president within the military. And last year, there were reports of a planned coup by some soldiers who saw Embalo's government as illegitimate. But the president says it wasn't just the military who was behind Tuesday's attempt.
It's not only soldiers who were involved, but it's mostly the fight against drug trafficking that was at the root of it. Most people who were involved are on the list of people who are being investigated for drug trafficking. I can promise you that fight will continue.
President Embalo declared war on drug trafficking and corruption when he took office in 2020. The West African country emerged as a hub for transporting cocaine from Latin America to Europe and the US in the early 2000s due to its porous coastline. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime says Guinea-Bissau was particularly vulnerable to the trade because of poverty, political instability, and alleged links between the drug cartel and some members of the military. In 2019, nearly 2 tons of cocaine were impounded in the West African country. The UN also says that drug trafficking provides funding for criminal and terrorist networks in the Sahel region. Now let's hear more from Professor Mamadou Salah from De Montfort University. He joins me from Leicester, UK. Thank you so much for joining us. The UN has been warning of the drug trafficking problem in Guinea-Bissau for years now, and even predicted that the illegal drug trade could undermine the government someday. How much of this do you think is responsible for Tuesday's failed coup attempt in Guinea-Bissau?
Thank you very much, Ade. I think there are many still unknown factors in this conundrum, but one thing we can say for certain, I mean, according to the president, is that there is some narco involvement and that some people who are involved in the drug trade and are being investigated have a hand in this coup, allegedly. And I guess if you look at it, if you look at the fact that, I mean, according to one of the UN reports, a kilo of cocaine would cost you about $1,500 in Colombia, and you can sell it for $150,000 in the US, and you can sell it for $100,000 in Europe. That shows the magnitude of profit that is involved in this. And as a state, that's not quite where it needs to be economically, politically, in terms of security, and potentially one could argue they are weak institutions. It is quite fertile grounds for the drug trade. And then, like you said, you know, we're talking about over 2 million significant amounts of drug being seized in Guinea-Bissau, which speaks to the fact that it is a significant transit point for all of these groups. But the other significant bit is that that the funding generated from this drug trade is used in ways that could destabilize the region further and fund criminal activities as well.
What are the chances of the involvement of a transnational organized crime network that's threatened by Guinea-Bissau's war on drug trafficking? And how should the government deal with this challenge to prevent a future attempt?
Yeah. And I think that the volume of drug that is said to have been seized over the last year or so in Guinea-Bissau cannot be pushed by small-time drug leaders. We're talking about massive tons that are being pushed through Guinea-Bissau. And my assumption would be that there would be significant organized international global networks that are behind this, given the amount of money that can be made. And I guess Guinea-Bissau, because when you talk about these huge sums of money, military people can actually be vulnerable to actually, in one way or the other, be induced into being involved in these networks. And I guess that the Guinea-Bissau government has got its work cut out, where you're talking about a president saying explicitly that narco interests are involved in his attempted assassination. It's outrageous that any group can actually try to take out in broad daylight the government of a country. Is actually mind-blowing. But the fact is that the interest, the amount of money at stake far outweighs any moral or kind of like anything to do with conscience that any of these groups would have. So I think the government will find it difficult because these groups will infiltrate to all levels.
Right. How do you explain the ineffectiveness of measures by both regional and international organizations to curb military takeovers in West Africa?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at for example, the G5 Sahel group that was set up, where you have, you have Mali and you've got Burkina Faso and Chad and all of these groups, and most of them have experienced it. And then you're talking about ECOWAS. I mean, in the case of the Gambia, where Yahya Jammeh refused to go when he lost the election, they actually threatened a military force that would go and remove him by force. But apart from that, they rely on sanctions, and sanctions bite both ways. They bite the military people in charge, but they also bite the ordinary people and bring untold suffering on them. So is that effective? Because right now, the main tool, the main weapon of ECOWAS, for example, is economic sanctions, which have a massive impact on the ordinary people. So do you keep on doing that in order to actually dislodge the military government, or do you employ other sanctions? And what are the other tools in their toolbox? I mean, apart from international
well, that's the question. What are the other tools, really? What else can they do?
And this is the bit where in terms of development that ECOWAS should initiate, the African Union should initiate, and doing closer collaboration, and then also closer integration, having the standby force, which should be used as a stick. Right. A serious stick that will be implemented. I don't know whether there's been any serious intent, apart from the case of the Gambia, to take on this by force. But also, is this the best way of doing it? When the people have had enough, you see in Burkina Faso, where people are actually coming out to actually in support of the government that's taken over the coups. So the question, I think it's a very complicated, multifaceted thing.
Indeed.
That requires a case-by-case analysis.
Right. Professor Mamadou Salah from De Montfort University, thank you so much for speaking to Africa Matters. Thank you. Another West African country suffering in the aftermath of a coup is Mali, and it's having detrimental consequences for the economy. Mali is one of Africa's leading cotton producers, and 25% of the population make a living from the sector. After the military takeover, the regional bloc known as the Economic Community of West African States suspended trade with Mali and closed their borders. And as Adam Amunu reports, that's left thousands of farmers and producers in jeopardy.
They call it white gold in Mali. Since 1995, cotton has grown in popularity after the government promoted it as a cash crop. Today, the country is Africa's leading cotton producer, and the crop is its second largest export after gold.
There are 4 million people currently working in the cotton sector. Cotton represents 15% of the national GDP and generates more than $600 million for the economy.
But that booming revenue is under threat. Thousands of Mali's cotton producers could face hardship after the Economic Community of West African States imposed sanctions over delayed elections. Mali's junta seized power in August last year, promising elections would take place in February this year. But now those elections have been stalled, with the junta saying it could stay in power for up to 5 years before restoring civilian rule. In response, ECOWAS froze financial aid and the country's assets at the Central Bank of West African States, and its members closed their borders to Mali. But farmers like Mahamadou Konate rely heavily on exporting cotton to make a living.
The sanctions cause us a lot of difficulties because only 2% of the cotton is processed in Mali, the rest is exported. If they sanction us, how are we going to sell our cotton to the outside? We set the price of cotton according to the world market, but if we don't bring it to this market, how are we going to do it?
The effects could be catastrophic for 2 reasons. First is cash flow. Cotton growers sell to a state-controlled company, the Malian Company for the Development of Textiles, or the CMDT. This means border closures and sanctions could hurt the government's ability to buy cotton from farmers. Secondly, the CMDT processes the cotton before exporting it to neighbouring West African countries. This season, it said it was only able to export a third of the processed goods before the borders closed.
We haven't felt the effects yet, but we really have to find a solution. If the CMDT's financial reserves were to run out without our being paid, it would be a disaster.
Analysts expect a record yield of 820,000 tonnes this season, compared to 147,000 last year. But without anyone to buy it, the thousands of Malians who work in the cotton industry face an uncertain future. Adam Amunu, Africa Matters.
We have more stories coming up for you here on Africa Matters, including...
I'm Timothy Obiezu in Abuja, Nigeria, where cash-strapped citizens rely on online lending companies, but those who can't pay back their loans on time are facing a different kind of payback.
I'm Sipa Kema, and I'll be reporting on the impact of the climate crisis in various parts of the country. Heavy floods and severe storms are just some of the effects caused by the shift in temperature and weather change.
South Africa has felt the devastating force of the climate crisis. Heavy rains and flash floods have caused widespread destruction and left dozens dead since the start of the year. While the government and aid groups are on the ground helping, it will be a long road to recovery. Sipa Kema has more.
Ruin and pain is all that's left behind after heavy floods ripped through various parts of the Eastern Cape between December and January. Homes and informal settlements were suddenly washed away, along with a few possessions that some had spent their lives collecting.
I've lost everything. I'm a hawker. I try to make ends meet by selling chocolates. I stay with my child. I've lost everything. As you can see, I don't have anything. I'm sleeping in other people's houses. I can't even talk. I'm broken.
Further east in the province, a severe storm tore through several villages. Nothing was spared.
As you can see, my house is gone. The small business I had is destroyed. I don't know how I'll get more stock. I'm deeply hurt. I don't know what I'm going to do because even the local government isn't much help.
At least 21 people have died in the Eastern Cape since December. One of them, 18-year-old Oetu Pamela, was pulled away by the floods, despite her mother and sister's attempts to save her.
There was water inside the house. When I saw Owetu being swept away, I told my mother. She tried to get to Owetu. When I realized they were both swept away, I tried to look for them, only for me to get submerged underwater. I couldn't see where my sister went, but I found my mother holding onto a mattress. I got to her as the mattress floated away.
The Eastern Cape government will require assistance from the national authorities to cover the cost of damages and help residents find new shelter.
We are really a disaster-prone province. Almost every corner of the province has got an element of disaster. Provincial government and the metro alone won't be able to handle the situation like this. It's beyond what we have in terms of the allocation.
Those displaced by the high waters have been relocated to more comfortable temporary housing. But there are still more informal settlements along the floodlines. The government is hoping to move them to safer ground so tragedy doesn't repeat itself. Sipa Kema, Africa Matters, Eastern Cape, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Matters, and here's a roundup of other stories making news across the continent. French oil giant Total Energies and China's CNOOC have struck a $10 billion deal to unlock Uganda's energy resources and build a massive regional oil pipeline. The mega project was announced at a ceremony in Uganda's capital, Kampala. It aims to exploit millions of barrels of oil reserves under Lake Albert, which were first discovered in 2006. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has hailed the agreement, but it's also sparked controversy. Drilling could displace thousands of people and destroy the region's rich biodiversity. South Africa is easing its COVID-19 restrictions as it moves out of the fourth wave of infections. The government has announced that those who test positive with no symptoms will no longer need to be isolated. The country has also cut down the quarantine period for symptomatic cases from 10 days to 7. Schools are fully open for the first time since the pandemic began, but the decision comes as the number of infections fall and vaccination levels rise. Ethiopian Airlines has resumed its Boeing 737 MAX flights for the first time since the crash that killed 157 people. 3 years ago, a flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi nosedived only 6 minutes after takeoff. It happened only 5 months after a similar crash in Indonesia left 187 people dead. The incidents triggered a global grounding of the Boeing aircraft. While there's still some skepticism about resuming flights, Ethiopian Airlines says it made its decision after intense recertification by regulators in the US, the European Union, China, and Ethiopia. Millions of people in Nigeria depend on what are known as soft loans, which have lower interest rates and more lenient terms than traditional banks. But authorities have opened an investigation into these online lenders. Many borrowers have complained that those who can't pay their debts on time are being forced to pay with their reputations. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
In October, artisan Kingsley Eromosele was in desperate need of cash. He turned to an online lender for a quick loan of about $13 and agreed to pay it back with an interest of $6 in 14 days. But he failed to meet the deadline and says the loan company broke into his bank account and took the money. It also contacted his family and friends to tell them about his debt and smear his name.
It's a bad reputation because when you collected this money, nobody knew. Now, to pay back, maybe something have not actually come up. Then they will now start calling your people, your father, no, that is bad.
Experts say online soft loan firms are thriving in Nigeria due to widespread poverty and strict conditions imposed by licensed commercial banks. Online lenders usually don't require collateral and offer easy access through mobile devices, but they also come with high risks. Esther, who asked not to use her real name, found out the full cost of her loan when she missed her payment.
They called my dad and they were insulting him. If you know your You cannot take care of your children. Why give birth to them? You're a stupid man. You're this, you're that. You could not raise them properly. That's why, so many, like they were just saying so many things. And the next thing I started seeing my pictures on my contact list, telling them I'm a criminal.
Authorities have set up a joint task force, including the Anti-Graft Agency and Consumer Rights Watchdog, to regulate and penalize poor practices by online loan companies.
The initial investigation shows that many of those companies don't even have physical addresses. The apps that have been deployed, some found out that some of the companies are actually hosted in France, some in Southeast Asia, in China, some other places. And so just being able to ensure that they have local footprints to be able to hold them accountable, it's one of the things that will come out in the business guidance.
Nigeria's central bank has urged citizens to avoid online lenders and use microfinance banks or government loan schemes more. But economist Obinaya Urakba argues that red tape and high interest rates make those options impossible for average users.
Just to tell you that even before the loan sharks, the online lenders became this prominent. You still had microfinance banks that were already giving loans at 5% per month, meaning that that's 5% per annum. That's almost like 60% per annum. That's a lot for, let's assume, micro, small, and medium enterprises, or even for individuals who earn salaries.
While authorities are increasing scrutiny on mobile loan operators, people like Kingsley and Esther are still paying the damage done to their reputations. Timothy Obiezu, Africa Matters, Abuja.
In Sao Tome and Principe, the fishing industry provides employment for many. In a country where most of the population lives below the poverty line, pandemic-related restrictions have made life even more harder. Ramesa Choda has more.
Maria Olga is a fishmonger. She sells dried salted fish in Sao Tome and Principe. It's a business that's been getting harder by the year. But since the pandemic hit the economy, her income has really suffered.
Everything was shut down, so a lot of fish got spoiled because we couldn't sell it. I spend a lot on transport, and sometimes I get here and don't even sell 1 kilo of fish.
Artisanal fishing, carried out by individual households using traditional practices, plays an important role in food security and poverty eradication. This sector represents a crucial revenue source for low-income families, but locals say in recent years the fish population has been shrinking.
All my life I've lived off fishing. Many species that we used to catch can't be found anymore.
According to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization, biodiversity loss, overfishing, and now the pandemic have created problems for many people relying on small-scale fishing.
In Africa, small-scale fisheries are very important in marine fisheries, but also in inland fisheries in the big African lake region, for example. They provide not only the local consumers with highly nutritious food, but also all the consumers in the regions, for example, that greatly benefit, for example, from small dried fish that is in particularly important for the nutrition of the more vulnerable parts of the populations.
The pressure created by the pandemic has shown that in many African countries where population growth and poverty rates are high, those who subsist through artisanal fishing are facing a precarious future. Rumesa Chodar, Africa Matters.
This week, we explore Kumasi, a city in the south of Ghana. Known as the Garden City of the West African country, Kumasi is the second largest city in Ghana. It's also the commercial, industrial, and cultural capital of the historical Ashanti Empire. Take a look. That's our show this week. Please share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode or ideas you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag #AfricaMatters. Feel free to reach out to me on my personal handle at @AdeshawaJosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters. Like, comment, and share. We'll leave you with these images from across our continent.